that dive, right? You've introduced it. So if you're not traditionally publishing, and by traditionally publishing, those are publishing houses that you've typically heard of, the big, I don't know, are they 6, 4, 8, 12, whatever. But traditional publishing, and that route looks like getting an agent repping you, trying to get a deal with a traditional publisher, long lead time, giving up of control, right? Mm-hmm. Or some sense of control, but having a brand name.
Yeah.
If he's not going that route, or is maybe debating going that route, let's explore these other options. As you said, the difference between self and traditional, these different stages, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I come to you and I'm like, Jenn, are you an independent publisher? Are you a hybrid publisher? And also I've had people come to me and they're like, I'm going to self-publish. And I look at them and I say, well, do you know how you're going to edit it? Do you know who's going to design it? Like all of those questions. So take us through like how you view self-independent or hybrid, if you can, or what do those definitions look like?
Yeah. So the way that I look at it, I just think of like a spectrum. So you have traditional publishing way in this direction that is not accessible or attainable for a lot of people. And I think that's kind of the unfortunate side of publishing, right. That, as you and I know, like with publishing, it's a numbers game, especially with the traditional publisher. So they only want to take a bet and a chance on an author in their book if they believe it's going to sell a large volume of copies. And the ways in which those are sold are through the author's network themselves. So if you don't have a very large platform of, hundreds of thousands of followers,
right,
it can be really tricky to get access to a deal like that. So one of the downsides I find, at least on the traditional side of things, is that you lose so much creative control over the process. So in the way that I've described it to anyone that I've talked to is, if you think about it, they're trying to sell your book to their audience, not your book to your audience. And those two audiences can be dramatically different.
That's a great point.
Right. And so if you're writing the book because you want to increase your business, and they've edited it or they've designed it in a way that it's serving their readers, it may not actually fuel your business goals of having it help you, increase your visibility, your opportunities, speaking, whatever it might be. So, I think that there is absolutely a place for traditional publishing for certain authors, but it's a very, very small percentage of authors who kind of get access to those situations.
Right.
So what ended up happening is the pendulum swung to where everybody was like, okay, I can't get access to this deal, or maybe I don't want to give up control. Or maybe I don't want to make hardly anything on the sale of a book because, when you're traditionally published, you're making 4, 6, maybe 10% of a royalty, 10% if you're lucky, versus self-publishing. It's this amazing world where you keep everything that you make. So, we're looking at like maybe $1 a book on the traditional side versus like maybe $10 a book on the self-publishing side.
Right. And sorry to interrupt you, but along this, as the pendulum is swinging, Amazon comes along and is like, we can let you self-publish with a click of a button. Ha ha ha. But I mean, in all fairness, the technologies and the barriers to entry have been lowered on the self-publishing side as well, right? So that was also happening simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think to me, that was with the advent of print on demand. That's really where self-publishing became accessible to so many more people. Because before, with self-publishing, you still had to know how to hire the right people, whether it's editors, cover designers, typesetters, all of those pieces. But the bigger headache was distribution. So now you have to do offset printing, which means you have to order 1,000 or 2,000 books. And now you have to have them sitting in your home, or you have to send them to Amazon and they have to warehouse them and you have to pay for them to warehouse it. So it was so cost prohibitive. But with print on demand, once your files are uploaded into their system, any customer can access that file and purchase your book at any time through a number of different channels, and without having that very expensive, heavy overhead of inventory.
Right. The initial investment.
Yeah.
So on that spectrum, we're sort of not on the traditional spectrum, right? So we're going self, but self can literally be you, yourself, and your dog and your computer and nobody else, right? But there's a lot of trial and error. Keep walking us along that spectrum to sort of, and how you then come into the picture, or how it starts looking more like hybrid or independent.
Yeah. So the way that I would describe with like independent publishing, I think that there's a lot of, I think, confusion around just the term independent publishing, at least the way that I would define it.
Right.
And that may not be how someone else would define it, is they are the smaller publishing houses. So they're the, maybe they're doing 12 books a year, 20 books a year, something that's significantly smaller. And they have very personal and intimate relationships with whomever they're serving. And a lot of times they do operate in a traditional sense where the author isn't funding the project. So that independent publisher is taking on the cost in all of the things that go with it. Again, editing, design, all of the things. And so that way that author doesn't have the upfront. Some independent publishers have very wide reach. Some of them don't really have much of a reach at all. And a lot of them have very niche and narrow focuses, which is great, especially if you're writing about something, you really want to find the right publisher for you, which kind of lends itself to hybrid publishing, because some people call hybrid publishers and independent publishers the same thing. Okay. And again, it kind of depends on how you would define it. But how I would define hybrid publishing is that's when you as the author are making the payments and hiring the right publisher to help you get your project done. The benefit of that is that, with PYP, we are a hybrid publisher. We've published over 50 books at this point in just the last couple of years. And we have assembled just an amazing team of human beings who know what they're doing, from editing to design to being able to connect them with people like you, Nancy, to do marketing. It's really just this beautiful thing, rather than the very simple definition of self-publishing where you're doing it on your own.
Right.
And what ends up happening is that with self-publishing, you end up spending so much time and energy and headaches doing things in the wrong order, or hiring the wrong editors, or getting taken advantage of because you don't know how much you should be paying for a certain part of the project. So yeah, it can get very mucky. And there's another piece in here, which are vanity publishers, which I don't even like to give them any airtime. However, this is one of those traps that a lot of first-time authors get into, is that they see like, oh, wow, for $1,000, they're going to publish my book. But what you don't know is that they'll take anything, they're not editing it, and they're just literally taking whatever you've given them and slapping it together and putting it out into the universe, which is not a good representation of someone's brand when you look at it and you're like, wow, that's got a lot of typos. Like, that's not helping your business in any way, shape, or form. And they're everywhere.
So that author doesn't, I won't say, it's not that they lose control, but nothing actually else happens. So if it's a manuscript that, let's say, needs a little help, those vanity publishers won't even, they're like, sure, great, publish it.
Yeah, they'll take anything. And so
they don't do anything to elevate it, so to speak.
No, not at all. And so there's an organization called the Independent Book Publishers Association, and they put out a guide around what hybrid publishing means. And if you claim yourself as a hybrid publisher, what you actually have to adhere to. And some of the things are, quality control, obviously. Right. Should be number one. But one of the big things with hybrid publishers is making sure that, like, when you're interviewing a potential publisher for your book, knowing what their mission is, like, what do they stand for? What types of books do they publish? Because that's usually the telltale sign, because a vanity publisher will publish anything from erotica to a book on taxes. And it's like that, there should be a difference there, because the marketing strategies and the promotional strategies are wildly different between those types of books.
Well, enough airtime for those, but I think that's a lovely public service announcement to first-time writers to understand that or ask those questions.